And so our second and final presentation for today, but we will be here all week long, Monday through Thursday, because that's how many graduates we have. We're so very, very proud of them. So our final presenter for today is Tristan Wright, who's going to talk to us about Mycelium mine, Psilocybin, as a potential treatment for OCD. Thank you so much.
As Dr. Cook said, my presentation is asking why psilocybin has the potential to be a decent treatment for obsessive compulsive disorder. In order to do this, we're going to have to do a sequential look at first obsessive compulsive disorder and what its characteristics are, how it affects people on a day-to-day basis, as well as the characteristic self-reinforcing cycle that perpetuates the problem and actually makes it worse as time goes on. After that, we'll look at the neural networks in the brain, specifically 3 neural networks: the salience network, default mode network, and the central executive, as well as a very specific circuit within the brain that has been known to cause obsessive compulsive disorder, or at least perpetuate it. And then we'll begin talking about psilocybin, which will describe how it operates, how it can be effective. We'll look at how serotonin is related, and as well as the legality of the entire situation. Since if you're not aware, psilocybin is currently legal in the United States. I was inspired by this topic initially from an episode of Scrubs. There was Michael J. Fox as a guest star, and he had OCD. And watching him be a practitioner in a hospital while still dealing with all these issues was really eye-opening. So I looked into this book by psychiatrist Dr. Ian Osborne, and it was very enlightening. And it made me realize that there's a lot more that I didn't understand about OCD and how probably the general population perceived it to be. And following through that idea, I have the inclination that there are better methods out there to treat it than what's currently being used. So I mentioned that OCD is, in my opinion, misunderstood. I found it's the only corny joke I have right now. On the left, you'll see someone, we've probably all heard someone like this say, "Oh, I have OCD, could you take your shoes off when you come in?" Just something a little peculiar, nothing too out of the ordinary. But the person on the right is actually exhibiting serious cases of OCD where they say, "I have OCD. I have horrible thoughts of my family and friends dying in a fire, and the only slight relief I can get is an embarrassing ritual that I know is irrational, but he has to do it anyways." So OCD affects approximately 2 to 3% of the population. That's higher than schizophrenia, as Jareth mentioned, but also lower than generalized anxiety or major depressive disorder. It's somewhere in between there, but it is considered common and pretty prevalent. It's characterized by ruminating thoughts, which is where the obsessions come in. They're constantly occurring, constantly bombarding you with this idea, whatever that idea may be. That's then followed by these overwhelming urges, which is where the compulsions come in. Those are used to cope with the obsessions that are constantly flowing in. And those obsessions create anxiety, which the compulsions are supposed to alleviate. But the entire process is still continuously inducing anxious feelings or thoughts. And this is a disorder that's characterized as ego-dystonic, meaning that it is against the person's will. It goes against their own ideas or values, and they don't want to think these things or do these things, but they are compulsive and they have to. 4 common major subtypes here. Contamination is one. Like I mentioned in Scrubs, the doctor had to wash his hands constantly, 30 minutes, maybe an hour, for seemingly no reason, but to him there is a reason. Harm, people will often have intrusive thoughts that are related to harming themselves or harming people they care about, and maybe they'll duct tape the knife drawer shut or give someone else their car keys so they're not concerned with hurting someone. Disorder is related to checking and making sure everything is just right. There's something called not just right issue, which if I saw that thing's crooked, I have the urge to fix it, and then I'll take measurements of this whole entire room to make sure everything is right. That's part of it. Blasphemy is more on the religious side. People who have lots of religious beliefs, this is more common with them. They'll have a thought that maybe is against what their religion is or blasphemous against some higher being, and they can spend hours a day praying, repenting, or finding some sort of repentant exercise to correct that issue. So what we can observe is the loop that causes this cycle. It starts with any sort of stimulus. It can even originate from inside your own mind. But if it's external or internal, there will be a stimulus that was processed in the brain, but it's processed and flagged as something being incorrect. It's labeled as important, but it shouldn't be. So then that ends up being an issue where you perceive it as something that needs to be fixed. And if it's not fixed, that's where the anxiety starts building up. And usually it's not something that's supposed to be fixed, and so it just feeds on itself. Now, in order to alleviate that anxiety, you find some sort of compulsion or some sort of act, whether that's internal or external, to correct it in some way. And that brings a brief moment of relief to you, and the anxiety is brought down. But that then tells your brain that, okay, this is a good thing. That now that I've done this act to correct my concern, the next time that concern comes up, I'm going to do that same thing over again because it solved the problem, even if it was just for a brief moment. What we can observe inside the brain is a lot more metabolic activity. So this is a PET scan or a positron emission tomography scan. On the top row, you'll see healthy control groups as what a normal brain should be operating with and look like. And on the bottom, you'll see someone with OCD, with a lot of the darker red areas showing a lot of metabolic activity, a lot of energy usage, a lot of blood flow, typically being associated with just more activity in the brain as a whole. This is happening due to how the neural networks work within the brain. So as I mentioned, we'll be talking about 3 specific ones. The first one being the salience network, and it is going to be responsible for identifying what is important. So information that comes in is then flagged and categorized as something that needs to be handled by this part of the brain or by this part of the brain. And it's going to kind of start the process of processing the information. It does a really good job at helping alternate between the other 2 networks that we're talking about, the default mode network and the central executive. That's because they're kind of antagonistic to each other, or polar opposites in a way. The default mode network is more of your resting, calm, not necessarily super hyper-focused state. It's more associated with introspection, imagination, just daydreaming thoughts, just your natural process as you go about the world. The problem in OCD is that it's very hyperactive, and as you saw on the other slide where there's a lot of activity going on in there, they're very fixated on these things that are passing through their brain. And with the imagination being associated, then they're adding more onto it that probably isn't there, like your whole family dying in a fire because the light switch didn't turn on correctly. Alternatively, the central executive network is your more active state. It's more associated with complex problem solving, whether you're doing math or you're trying to solve some sort of problem actively. It's not necessarily less inactive in OCD, but it's also not hyperactive either. It's more just not communicating as properly. It'll actually, the default mode network will actually talk to the central executive network more than it should. It's actually sending more signals that direction, which is kind of a problem if it's having these false imaginative concerns. So there has been a specifically identified circuit in the brain that is closely correlated to OCD called the cortical striatothalamic circuit loop, or CSTC loop. It's comprised of the orbitofrontal cortex in the front of the brain. That's going to be responsible for your importance evaluation, similar to the salience network. And it's also supposed to be a first line of defense for impulse control. It's supposed to be able to filter that stuff out. But when it doesn't, it'll send information to the striatum, which will direct the decision-making process. So it'll take in that information and decide what to do with it in response. It's also going to tie emotional value to whatever that stimulus is coming in as. So then it'll send it to the thalamus, and the thalamus will receive the concern and coordinate a response and send all those signals out to the brain in order to execute that with the help of the basal ganglia, which is in that same area. But the problem is that thalamus will then send that signal directly back to the orbitofrontal cortex, and it'll say, hey, you need to look out for this stimulus again. You need to be paying attention, because the next time this comes around, we'll have to fix it, right? And so that fortifies that loop where it's just a cyclical nature of stimulus, something's wrong, now I have to look for that stimulus after I fix it again to make sure it doesn't happen again. The problem is that when this happens over and over again, it's typically not as rewarding as a relief, and so it causes more anxiety, so you have to do it more, or have a longer process to fix it until everything is just right. So there's clearly a lot of miscommunication going on in the brain. Things are not communicating properly, there's dysfunction. How exactly does psilocybin fix that? Well, it will actually end up making a lot more of a mess in a way. On the left, this is a visual representation of, on the left, someone who took a placebo medication, and that is representative of all the connections and activity going on in the brain. So different parts of the brain are talking to each other and communicating with each other. Just with placebo, that's typically a normal brain, you could say. On the right is someone who was given psilocybin. So there's much more activity, much more interconnectivity. Everything's talking to everything. And that is because of how it affects the serotonin system. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter. It helps information transfer between the neurons throughout your entire body. But it's responsible for mood regulation, sleep habits, memory, and all throughout your body. It does digestion. It's got all kinds of responsibilities with it. Serotonin receptors are known as 5-HT receptors. The three that we are looking at right now are the 2A, which is essential for learning and your typical thought processes, thought patterns, and cognitive perceptual abilities. 2C for mood regulation and dopamine monitors other neurotransmitters and making sure all the levels are good. And the 1A, which is your limbic response, or emotional response control, that type of thing. But psilocybin, which is a psychedelic compound, when we talk about psilocybin, we're actually talking about psilocin. When you ingest psilocybin, your digestive system will actually break it down and metabolize it into psilocin. The psilocin then travels into your bloodstream, then into your brain, and that is actually what's acting on those 5-HT receptors I was talking about. It's not exactly psilocybin, but it is psilocin instead. So on the bottom right here, that's the molecular structure of psilocin, which is very close to serotonin. Very similar. And because of that, it is very good at binding to those three specific receptors I mentioned, and it stays there for a long period of time. And because it stays there for so long, that's why it's overstimulating these receptors, and that's where the hallucinations come from, the altered sense of perception, and all the things that follow with psychedelic drugs mostly, is because it's sticking to those receptors for such a long time. With the 2A, 2C, and 1A receptors, those are very abundant in the cortical striatothalamic circuit loop that I was talking about earlier. So there's a close connection between what is affecting OCD and what psilocybin does to that process as well. This is just two of the receptors I was talking about. On top is the 1A that, again, affects your limbic response. So it's, when treated, it should be kind of bringing you back to a baseline function in a way. And on the bottom we have the 2A receptor, which again gives you that adaptability, that change in perception or change in thought process or thought pattern. So why I'm making the case that this is a good idea is because that in all of the studies that were looked at, it is very clear that psilocin or psilocybin is very effective at stimulating those receptors, the 5-HT2A, 2C, 1A. In doing so, it encourages a neurogenesis in the brain where the neurons will begin to make new connections or make new neurons next to stem cells or something like that. With all of that, it gives the brain an opportunity to reset itself, again bringing something back to baseline, which you're sobered up in this case, or the best way I've heard it described as if you imagine that your mind is like a mountain, like a snow-capped mountain. The more you go on in life, you're making these trails in your mind, you're making these trenches or divots as you're walking through the snow, packing it down, right? The idea with psilocybin is that with all those new connections being made, it's like if snow is falling on that mountain again, and now it's a fresh take, and you're able to make new trails and not fall into those same trenches that you were walking through before. So potentially, it may just be more accurate at treating the specific points that OCD is stemming from. Rather than the usual medications, it might actually be directly affecting the process because all of those receptors are filled within that CSTC loop. Within all the trials that I looked at, every single one reported that basically all of the patients or surveyors or case studies received some level of relief from their symptoms. And there was very few unexpected side effects, unexpected being the fact that it is psychoactive, so there is some of that going on. But as far as OCD goes, it does a really good job at helping almost everyone that takes it. With that, there's also the added benefit that it's long-lasting. So even single dose treatments were shown to help certain people for up to 6 months with relief of their symptoms, rather than taking constant medication for it. Speaking of that medication, the current methods of treatment for OCD, the two main ones are SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Those are preventing your parts of your brain from reabsorbing serotonin before the receptors are able to grab a hold of them. So if your neurons are releasing serotonin, then sucking it back up again, then there's not going to make that connection to those receptors in the brain. So you don't really have it available. That process is about 40 to 60% successful. Some people have no relief at all, some people have a little bit of relief, but it causes them a lot of issues having to take this medication all the time because there are a lot of side effects to it as well. Lots of nausea or other biological functions that are disrupted by the process. The other one is cognitive behavior therapy, and that is a little bit better. It's got about a 50 to 70% success rate, but it is very difficult to maintain. It's a very demanding process. It requires both the patient and the practitioner to be fully invested in healing this issue. Lots of people don't follow through all the way and just end up relying on medication that may not even be helping them. But that's typically done through exposure and response prevention. So say I had a contamination issue or OCD, and I touched something that I thought was gross, and I have to wash my hands for 30 minutes. The idea is that I'm exposing myself to that and washing my hands for 20 minutes instead. And then the next time it's 10 minutes. And the next time I don't wash my hands at all. And it's supposed to retrain yourself, but that's a very difficult and unpleasant process for a lot of people. The legality is a little bit concerning and a little bit difficult to work with. It's psilocin and psilocybin both are under the Schedule I controlled substance of DEA in the United States, meaning it has zero medical value, it has a high risk of abuse, and that just ends up putting a lot of restrictions on researchers and scientists for unfair reasons, in my opinion. Other narcotics in this category are heroin and MDMA. Funnily enough, marijuana is also in there, which that's also something to argue about medical value. But as we've seen here, there is evidence that it could have a lot of substantial medical value. And I'm slightly biased, but I haven't heard too many people who are habitually abusing psilocybin regularly, because it's not always the most fun for a lot of people. So they end up taking a step back from it after a while. But ultimately, all it does is, with this part of the legality, is that it just restricts further knowledge, further development, and further understanding of things like OCD and serotonin, and how different substances can affect this stuff potentially more effectively than current medication does. Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is there anywhere where this is legal?
There are some countries out there, a lot of research actually comes from Spain and Portugal, but most research that comes in is through like case studies, or like they can't exactly give people this stuff regularly unless they have special permission. So they'll often be like, hey, have you done so-and-so drug? Can you tell us about it? And they'll take measurements. Or, oh, you plan on taking drugs? Let's take a scan of you now, and then...
Recommend this one.
Yes, sir.
So I've got a couple of questions that, yeah, kind of. So is OCD, so the question about OCD itself, are there, and I'm assuming this, so that's why I'm asking the question, but it may not be true. Are there acute and chronic versions of OCD? Is it possible for somebody to develop like a short-term version of OCD and then work through it and be fine? Or is it one of those things that you have it and you struggle with it your whole life?
I do not have a source to cite for what I'm about to say. I would believe that there is. There seems to be that idea kind of floating out there that if someone is experiencing these symptoms, they may not have what we call OCD, because we look at it in a chronic sense, but I don't think there's any terminology for acute OCD that I'm aware of.
Okay. So that deals that one of the questions can go away then. But here's my follow-up here. Would the treatment then to, let's say that it's all chronic, that right, you're dealing with this forever. Would this treatment be like a maintenance kind of treatment, or would it be more therapeutic towards resolving the issue, right? So it sounds like what you're saying, what you're suggesting is that this would be something that we could give people a therapeutic course of it, and then they're better, they're good, right? Is that what's the research is showing?
Not necessarily. It's still like too soon to look that far ahead, but as far as the other treatments go, like SSRIs or cognitive behavioral therapy, those are ongoing for life, basically. There really isn't a whole lot of reason to suspect that it's just like one-time cure for the rest of your life. People who go through cognitive behavioral therapy often still talk about it. It gets easier, but it's still a process that continues forever. Same with SSRIs, it's constant medication.
So with psilocin, is there a way to have psilocin not be psychoactive, or is it the psychoactivity that is inherently a part of helping to treat OCD?
I saw one source that said that there's beginning talk about separating the two, but it doesn't seem very promising right now. It could be, yeah,
Legality issue.
it could be, because the legality concern is that it's more psychoactive, and disruptive.